and will have a very tough job undoing it if they choose to try. First, the scope of it. Here's ABC's Barry Seraphin.
Under the new regulation, new roads and most logging will be banned on nearly 1/3 of this country's national forest land, an area twice the size of North Carolina. The president says that will protect pristine forests and critical wildlife habitat.
The beauty of our wild lands will now be there for our children and all our children for all time to come.
Environmentalists who have fought hard for the roadless plan call it historic.
This is a truly extraordinary decision. I think it really is a landmark decision.
The plan does allow logging in cases where timber sales have already been approved or where it might be necessary to prevent forest fires. But the timber industry and others say it is a setback.
When a fire is going over the ridge, you can't be asking permission to build a road.
Analysts say there will be no major impact on the timber industry, but the roadless rule does mean less access for logging, mining, and drilling, as well as some recreation use. Some states say they did not have enough input and will try to scuttle the new regulation.
It leaves Idaho and a number of states no recourse but go to the federal court, file suit.
The U.S. Forest Service says one stark fact cannot be ignored. It says it cannot afford more roads. There are already 386,000 miles of roads in national forests, far more than the interstate highway system, and an $8.4 billion maintenance backlog. Still, it appears that the latest and largest part of what the president sees as his environmental legacy will be challenged. A controversy over public lands that will go on long after Mr. Clinton leaves office. Barry Seraphin, ABC News, Washington.
Mr. Clinton has worked to protect more public land from development than any president since Theodore Roosevelt. And in these final days of his presidency, Mr. Clinton is eagerly using his presidential powers to put his stamp on environmental policy. Here's ABC's John Cochran.
President Clinton had only to look outside the White House windows and see the stands being erected for George Bush's inaugural parade, a reminder that it was now or never to make environmental history.
He's concerned about his legacy, and I think he has shown many times that he's capable of kind of poking Congress in the eye and poking Republicans in the eye when he has to.
Protecting forests was a lot easier for Mr. Clinton than some of his other attempts to build a legacy, such as peacemaking in the Middle East. And he's made it as hard as possible for Republicans to overturn what he has done.
Republicans are steaming over a long list of Mr. Clinton's recent moves, including new clean air standards for diesel fuel and new workplace safety rules.
We haven't seen probably as much environmental and economic damage going out the door since Saddam Hussein torched the oil fields in Kuwait at the end of the Gulf War.
But Republicans probably do not have the votes to do much about it. And it could take George Bush years to go through the cumbersome rule-making process to reverse what Mr. Clinton has done.
This administration in its final days has been a busy beaver, and we will review all regulations and executive orders upon coming into office on January 20th.
Actually, all presidents in their final days make heavy use of their powers while they can. But Mr. Clinton is in a class by himself, putting a record number of rule-making pages in the Federal Register. And aides say he isn't finished yet. John Cochran, ABC News, the White House.
One other item from Washington today: on Capitol Hill, an agreement to share power in the new Senate.
Hello, welcome. Thanks for being with us. In his waning days in office, President Clinton sidestepped Congress today to trigger the biggest conservation program in decades. Within the past hour, Clinton issued an order that bans logging and drilling in national forests in 39 states. The order affects some 58 million acres, 1/3 of the land in the national forest system. Now joining us from the White House, CNN's Eileen O'Connor with more on the last-minute efforts to leave a legacy. Eileen.
Well, U.S. officials point out that the president has been working on this rule for over a year, Joey, and they say it will protect 58.5 million acres of national forest. Basically, what the rule does is it prohibits logging and the creation of roads in these great national forests. Now, the area actually covers more area than the national parks in the United States combined. It covers 39 states. It's being hailed by environmentalists as one of the most sweeping acts of conservation in decades. And also, the president proposed the rule, and in the waning days of his office, as you said, it is one of his biggest environmental initiatives. The U.S. officials say it will take the Bush administration some period of time, though, to overturn this rule. They, too, would have to have a public comment period as well. The president says he's doing this to preserve the open spaces of America for future generations.
We will protect nearly 60 million acres of pristine forest land for future generations. That is an area greater in size than all our national parks combined. From the Appalachian Mountains to the Sierra Nevada, forest land in 39 states will be preserved in all its splendor, off limits to road building and logging that would destroy its timeless beauty.
But even the National Forest Service, in an economic impact review for this rule, did say that it would eliminate some 400 jobs in the Tongass Forest in Alaska. Some 95% of the timber harvest there would be eliminated. And critics say this new rule could also make it harder for people to manage forests, to prevent wildfires and insect infestation. And also, other critics say that it was unnecessary, that in fact it is squandering the natural resources that America has.
We have a 17 million acre virgin forest, 30% of which the timber is dead or dying and has no other useful purpose other than wood fiber, which of course went in the pulp mills. So as we look at this action, clearly it's an effort to accommodate environmental.
Next.
The State Farm U.S. Figure Skating Championships, Saturday on ABC.
Next, light rail is as close to reality as it can be. Construction of the much criticized project became official today.
Also ahead, Senator Wellstone breaks his promise not to run again. You'll see his reasons why.
Plus, Glenn Mason is not moving on to Ohio State.
Live from KSTP-TV, this is Channel 5 Eyewitness News at 6.
Good evening, I'm Harris Faulkner.
And I'm Randy Meyer. Julie is off tonight. Gopher football coach Glenn Mason will not get a shot at his dream job. His alma mater, Ohio State, is giving it to another coach. Joe Schmidt has the story from Williams Arena, where he's getting ready to cover Gopher basketball tonight for us. Joe, do you think Mason's pretty disappointed with this?
Well, we haven't heard yet from Mason. It's going to be interesting to see what he has to say, but there's no question that Mason wanted this job, and he wanted this job badly. But Ohio State will announce tomorrow that Youngstown State head coach Jim Tressel is their new football coach, which means that Mason will have to mend some fences back here in Minnesota with alumni and fans. Mason was actually in Columbus today for his second interview. He was the last candidate that the Buckeyes talked to. Mason met with the athletic director, university president, and the search committee this morning. But later in the afternoon, word had leaked out that Mason was passed over and that Jim Tressel had gotten the job. Tressel coached with Mason in the mid-1980s at Ohio State. Mason first interviewed for this job 10 days ago, and during that time he continued to recruit as the head coach of the University of Minnesota. But once again, Randy, it'll be interesting to hear what Coach Mason has to say. We hope to have that tonight at 10.
All right, Joe, we'll check back with you a bit later on. Thank you. One of the most controversial ideas ever considered in the Twin Cities is now on track.
It was 30 years in the making. It's the light rail line along Hiawatha Avenue. Government leaders officially broke ground on the $675 million project today. The line will stretch from downtown Minneapolis to Fort Snelling by 2003, and by 2004, it will be finished and ready to take passengers all the way to the airport and to the Mall of America. Eyewitness News reporter Kristen Steiner has a close look at the first official steps for light rail. Kristen?
Harris, I'm standing in downtown Minneapolis, right in the middle of the entertainment district. This is where the first stop on the LRT line will be. Now, the Met Council just got the word go yesterday with the signing of a $334 million grant from the federal government to help pay for the project. They wasted no time breaking ground today.
The Cedar River Station is going to be right here.
Robert Johnson is 71 years old and has been waiting for a light rail system in the Twin Cities.
The USDA Forest Service presents live from Phoenix, Arizona, Advancing the Natural Resource Agenda, a roundtable discussion with Forest Service Chief Mike Dombeck, featuring highlights of the National Leadership Conference. The host of your program, George Lennon.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. During the past 2.5 days, leaders of the Forest Service have been involved in some frank and open discussions about how we can advance the natural resource agenda. In this program, we will explore the challenges, opportunities, and successes as we implement the natural resource agenda. With me for this afternoon's discussion, a familiar face to most of you by now, Forest Service Chief Mike Dombeck.
Glad to be here, George.
Also with us is Janice McDougall. Janice is Associate Deputy Chief for State and Private Forestry.
It's my pleasure to serve in this service-wide video conference. Thanks, George.
Thanks for being with us. From New Mexico is Cibola National Forest Supervisor Liz Akpoa. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to this.
And rounding out our panel, Denny Brashear, presently Forest Supervisor of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, and soon to be Director of Recreation. Thanks for joining us, Denny.
Thank you, George. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's a great opportunity to be introduced to the rest of the employees in the Forest Service in my new position.
This week, the leadership of the Forest Service has been meeting in Mesa, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix, for the Fall Leadership Conference. And of course, the primary topic before the conference has been the Forest Service Natural Resource Agenda that Chief Dombeck first talked to us about last March. People from throughout the Forest Service have offered their views and their vision for how we lead the agency into the 21st century. It's clear to me that there's been a lot of energy and enthusiasm here at the conference. We saw some very candid and constructive dialogue taking place about this agency and its future. With that, let's begin with some opening comments from Chief Dombeck. Mike?
Well, thanks, George, and thank you, Liz, Denny, and Janice for joining me here today to talk to all of our employees about the successes that we had this week. This conference was different from previous National Leadership Conferences. I invited a cross-section of employees from the organization, from regional foresters to hydrologic technicians to project leaders. And I wanted them to be with us here to share our views, the views with the entire leadership of the Forest Service, as how we move forward with the natural resources agenda. And I challenged the group to step out of their comfort zones, abandon their assumptions, and redefine our methods in communicating and serving our constituents. And in return, these employees from around the country provided the leadership with direct, frank dialogue on issues surrounding the natural resources agenda and achieving sound business practices. And I have to tell you, the exchanges were exciting, dynamic, and insightful. In our discussion today, we hope to capture for you the spirit and some of the ideas of the past 2.5 days here in Arizona. But first, let me briefly frame for you where this agency is as it prepares to meet the challenges of the next century. When I began this job, many of you told me that we needed to regain our status as conservation leaders. And we are succeeding in that challenge. Our conservation leadership over the past year is obvious. Earlier this year, we laid out an aggressive natural resources agenda that focuses on the services, on the values that American people need and support. We laid out aggressive solutions to long-standing problems, such as civil rights, financial management, and financial accountability. And by taking controversial issues such as forest roads head-on, we helped begin a long overdue dialogue about the future of the forest transportation system. We eliminated purchaser road credits, which will diminish the divisive road subsidy debate and lessen the internal incentive to build new roads in order to finance maintenance of our existing road system. Our roadless area proposal will mean fewer resources wasted on appeals and litigation, and it will give our field managers a breather while we develop scientific and analytical tools to make better informed decisions about road management on all our national forests. And I'm pleased with the progress, but we must accelerate the pace. We were able to get this far because we haven't shied away from taking on tough issues. And what remains for us is to articulate, both internally and externally, how our policies and practices are changing the agency's emphasis from tracking inputs and tracking the outputs that we produce. Our agency priorities, budget procedures, accountability measures are opaque and confusing. We must make them transparent and crystal clear for everyone to see and judge. We must change, consistent with principles of ecosystem management, collaborative stewardship, and social values. We must transform our view of forests as a warehouse of outputs. We've got to assign the greatest values to the positive outcomes of watershed management. And let me repeat the word outcome-based management. As members of this organization, our job, your job, and my job is to ensure that our incentives that drive all levels and all aspects of our programs are based on ecological sustainability. And I'm asking for your commitment. I'm asking for your creativity in helping us to develop the policies, hire the talented people, implement the management practices that support our words with actions and results on the ground.
Thanks, Mike. I know that one objective you had with this broadcast was to deliver the conference to the field, in a sense. To help do that, we selected a few excerpts from the presentation that were made. Over the last couple of days, we've heard a number of success stories, but one stood out in particular. Go ahead and roll that tape, please.
And by now you have heard that the Ford Foundation recognized us as well. They announced that Carson National Forest Initiative is one of 10 winners in the Innovations in American Government Awards. That means $100,000 comes to that unit, and we are very proud of that. That effort is the Northern New Mexico Collaborative Stewardship Program, and it was implemented on the Camino Real Ranger District. And that's a ranger district that is a land-grant community. What we did was start from the perspective of forest health and trying to recognize the rural economic needs of the community for fuel wood, firewood, wood for fences, and whatnot. And so we've been able to make a match there in terms of folks watching, taking care of a certain portion of the land and meeting our forest health expectations.
Mike, what a great way to start off a conference. I mean, such a national award and presentation, but I'm sure there are other successes out there.
Well, yeah, George, there are lots of successes, but first I want to congratulate Crockett and the staff on the district that made us so proud as an organization, because what this exemplifies is what we can do as an organization and the can-do spirit of the Forest Service. And I've got to say, Liz, you're from right here from Region 3. To see your colleagues achieve such a prestigious award. 1,500 applicants, and we're one of the 10 winners, and it brings to the region, to the district, $100,000. Way to go.
And it's wonderful. I think one of the successes of, or a success of doing that, and an outcome that we will see, is that it not only is something in the benefit that comes to the district, is that the community relationships are continually strengthened in that. And I've got to commend Crockett and the folks like Max Cordova for stepping out from their boxes and coming together and trying to do something wonderful for the land and the community.
And I'd like to say that given the prominence of the range wars of the West, Southwest in recent years, and the polarization, to have such a model come out of this region of the country is even more meaningful. And I would also like to thank Steve Marshall, because Steve saw this, he recognized it, he encouraged the unit to really go for it, and they were successful. So thanks, Steve.
You know, I'm really excited, Janice, about the fact that what this district has done is demonstrated how we can pull people together in intense controversy that we have. And I know, Denny, with you on the forest supervisor on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie, you deal with those kind of controversies. I know Liz does. And the other thing I like about this is its transferability. And the thing that I asked the team to do is we've got to take the lessons learned here. We've got to take these techniques that were developed right here in the Forest Service and apply them all around the country.
I agree. As I recently have come into the region, there's another example that is outstanding. There was a situation back in 1995 where there were flyers posted all over the East Mountains outside of Albuquerque, flyers that said, "Stop the Forest Service from burning." And we had some individuals in the fire organization come together and said, well, should we go? I mean, should we be there? They're obviously going to be very angry. And those folks stepped out in 1995 and said, okay, we're going to go tonight. And it was very contentious until they stepped forward during the meeting and started talking about what they were really trying to achieve. And I've got to say that last month, and we're at the open window of our burning season, those same folks and the homeowners associations who were about to just do us in several years ago call and say, we're ready to burn. Are you there with us? Come to our area of the forest, and we'll help you. So it really has changed around, and it really took the courage and initiative of folks from the homeowners associations and from the district saying, we need to be there. This is who we are.
I was struck by the fact that there are so many examples of how the natural resource agenda is being moved forward, and especially at the campfire event last night with the awards of the various grants to help stimulate and encourage that kind of activity. And I believe, if the number was right, there was something like 900 applications for those grants, and I think that was just outstanding, and I'm sure that's the tip of the iceberg.
That's right, Denny. And you know what that tells me is that tells me of the creativity, the opportunity that's out there. You know, and our challenge in the organization is to get more resources to the field, right down the interface of the land where it happens. It's that old saying of Aldo Leopold's, you know, the only progress that really counts is that on the landscape of the back 40.
Yeah, we certainly heard that throughout the conference.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that Liz has brought up is a sense of courage, and I think in the attendees to the conference demonstrated some true courage in some of the dialogue that we saw, and I'd like to several speakers talked about changes of the Forest Service needed to make to successfully implement the natural resource agenda. Here's a clip of Debbie Austin, supervisor of the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest.
Instead of being the bureaucracy that lays down edicts with strict standards, we've moved from a standard-driven approach to management to a goal-driven approach to management. And I think that's really, really important. And what I mean by that is, say, for example, in range management, the goal shouldn't be, did the cows eat 2% more grass than they should have eaten, and let's go get them if they did. But the goal should be, what's important? What do we want the land to look like? What do we want the riparian systems to look like? Can we explain to somebody what a functioning system looks like, and then have them help us figure out how to get there?
I have two forest supervisors here. There's challenges out there all the time, and I think that Debbie has really thrown something out to all of us to look at. And Denny,
I'm right with her. This outcome-based land management, I think, has been talked about for some time among the Forest Supervisors Group. I think even clear back to the late '80s, and maybe even sooner, earlier than that. It's so much easier to talk about common ground and where we're together with people who may initially be opposed to what we want to do if we're talking on that outcome-based level. And it's a chance to really set the goals and objectives for the piece of land before you get to a polarized point. So I think it's absolutely essential. I really applaud what she said and what she's done on her forest.
I think what's significant about that too is that she talked about the power of information and how once people understood what that goal was and understood how to get there and understood the value of getting there, they were with you. And it's as we learn more and we learn better how to communicate to people who don't understand what we've learned, there's a win-win opportunity, and that's the kind of stuff we're seeing all over the place.
I think what Janice is talking about, what Debbie's talking about too, is that shared learning. And I recall that Debbie also talked about letting people put their fingerprints on building decisions. And I think what can really work wonderfully is that because of maybe how we've handled things in the past and been very focused on how the regulations are specifically to the letter sometimes, and we forgot also that we're dealing with communities, that they are going to be pleased just to even be asked. That is something that that if you just include some of their intent and what they're saying, that will move you both along in the process, and I think it's wonderful.
You know what Debbie and several other employees at the meeting told us was really reminiscent of the reinvention hearings that the Forest Service had in the 90s, early 90s, that the American public expects us to be the educators, the facilitators, the catalysts for bringing people together in local communities and actually letting them be a part of the process.
I was surprised, having been part of the reinvention efforts, as was Liz, to hear convening and facilitating as much this week as I did in so many contexts. I was very pleased that people were comfortable in that role, a lot more comfortable in that role than they used to be.
And this was one of the keys to the success of the Camino Real district in the recognition and the award that they got from the Ford Foundation. It's that connection with people on the land.
And those people have been, in that case, been on the land for close to 400 years. And so we've got to include them and learn from them and just make our decisions that much more successful and richer.
We often talk about ecosystems and communities from the scientific standpoint, but the fact is that from the sociological standpoint, the communities are so important to our success in our achieving our stewardship goals.
And we're understanding that.
And we also heard, don't get ahead of the communities in our application of these new programs or initiatives, that we need to bring the communities along early on. I think that was a key point also.
I think one thing that I heard loud and clear for the past 2.5 days is the driving need to sort out communication tools for not just internal but external, and then integrate those tools. And you know, coming off of the forest, any suggestions?
Just the fact that you can't just use one tool. You've got to use many tools, and this conference is one that I think is, I'm going to be real fascinated to see how well it works, because it's another way of getting the word out. In the past, all we did was maybe put the notes on a bulletin board within the IBM or something, and you don't know who's going to access it, who isn't. Well, that's another tool. If we just don't depend on just one or two tools that we all have a responsibility from this conference to go back and explain what we've experienced and what we saw and what we heard. So it's a combination of all these, is my advice.
And my thought is, too, is we've learned that there is just not one prescription for an ecosystem, that we have hundreds of different ecosystems, and we need to learn a little bit about them before we decide what what is needed and at the time that it's needed. And I think that that's the same way that we should look at relationships with communities. There are so many, every community is unique, and what may work for the ranchers down in one part of the country may be different with how we deal with pueblos and tribes, or generational ranchers in another part of the country. So we know how to do that. We do that with the land. We need to leverage that and understand that with our communities too, and I think we can.
And what it all has in common is relationship building.
Yes.
At that level. At all levels, actually.
I heard this week a lot that collaboration is expensive, that collaboration is slow. And I thought those were interesting comments because in my mind, the alternative is even more expensive and is even slower. And so it's really worth that upfront investment, even though it's just a very different way of operating with the communities to really come together to get there, whatever there is, and then to try to impose a decision and never get there. But yes, it does take time, and more importantly, it takes different skills, and some of those we're just going to have to get better at. Yep. But it's the alternative to not doing it is far worse, in my opinion.
Two interesting things come out of this. Number one is as we talk to people that are interested in coming to work for the Forest Service, as we reach out to young people, people that are, even earlier than college, that to stress those communication skills. Anytime anyone asks me, what courses should I take? It's communications. Connecting with people is so important. And there's a frustration that comes with that. In fact, that came out loud and clear at the meeting, and that is that it's messier. But that's what democracy is all about. It's involving people. We are civil servants. We work for the taxpayers. They are the owners, all the taxpayers are the owners of the national forests we manage, and they are also the owners of the private lands, the woodlots, the industrial forests that state and private and the state foresters and others work with. And we've got to be able to connect with all of them to be successful.
I think that's another tool. I think that we're finding we have the heart to do it, and what we need to keep gaining are those skills. As we step into every situation, we experience it, and we just need to keep open to that.
Yeah, Chief, I'm glad to hear that you're a champion of communication. But how about business practices of the Forest Service? Wouldn't you say we must be able to apply good business practices to our work, especially in the area of financial accountability? And with that, I'd like to roll a tape of Vincent Gorel, our new Chief Financial Officer, who had some really insightful points for us.
So a little bit about where are we today. We're facing many challenges, and when I look at groups of constituencies or areas of concern out there, the first one comes from Congress and their criticism of our fiscal accountability. It is very extensive, and it gets extremely heated in the last couple of months. It is not going to clean up in the next year. It will take a dedicated, resource-intensive approach for a couple of years, as many as 3 to 4, and then we'll have to keep it up. The one thing I want to leave you with, it's doable. This is being done across government, has been done, is in progress. We know what we need to do, and I will need all of your attention and support to do it.
Mike, Vincent is your newest member on the executive team, and she also is bringing out a new idea, but an important idea of fiscal management accountability. Some opinions on that?
George, as I now am in this job about 21 months, the biggest challenge that the Forest Service faces today is this whole area of accountability, of fiscal integrity, and business management. Because the American public expects us to be able to balance our checkbook. The American public expects us to be able to get a clean financial audit, to be responsive to the 1991 Chief Financial Officer Act, and to apply the same business management practices to the United States government as are applied to the private sector. And our decentralized nature as an organization is appropriate for natural resource management because, things are different. Here in Region 3, things are different on the Mount Bakers and the Qualamy. Things are different on the various woodlots in the South and the Midwest and other places. But the fact is, a credit and a debit is the same every place we go. And it's our decentralized nature where we've got different systems in different parts of the country that is really causing this problem. And what we've got to do is we've got to put the systems in place so we can provide accurate data, balance sheets, and so that managers, forest supervisors, I have yet to have a forest supervisor tell me that they use National Finance Center monthly balance sheets to keep track of your budgets. So we're essentially running dual systems, which is expensive. So we got to get beyond this. And the point that I want to make here, and I want to make to everyone there, is the fact that business management is important. And we've got to have an equal respect for business management as we do for natural resource management. And I know the forest supervisors, all the unit managers struggle with this issue, and we've got to get on top of it.
I was very impressed with Vincent and her strength and her obvious passion to really get on top of this issue. And I think I can speak from the forest supervisor's perspective and also a district ranger's perspective. It's been years that I've been wanting to get a simpler system, and we chase a lot of pennies with dollars. And the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned, we get on top of that. She said it was a 25-year-old system that just isn't working today, and I would agree with that. I think it's time to change it. We are in a pilot project, basically in Region 6 on FFIS, and that's been. I understand it's going to be a solution. The going through it and trying to develop and working with it, those have been frustrating. I think you need to hear that, but. I'm confident that with Vincent's leadership, that she's going to get us to get on top of this.
Vincent comes to us, by the way, from the Customs Service, where she managed a $22 billion program and got a clean financial audit. So we're just delighted to have somebody of her skill and talent to work with us. We're lucky to have her.
I wanted to follow on what you said, Denny, is that we do really need a more contemporary system. And one of the reasons that we do is what was brought up in the last couple of days was the sense that we are doing a different kind of work. We're starting off on that, and a piece of that is collaboration. And when you collaborate, you don't necessarily collaborate by management codes. You collaborate for an outcome. And so if we could even get a system that addresses that, it would be really helpful.
I agree totally.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Janice. Well, for the audience viewing this, there has been some discussion that what Vincent and the program that's been unfolding out of Washington to find our fiscal security is been costly because it's taken spaces off the forest. How would either one of you answer that, and how do you feel about that? Is it worth it? Is there value to that?
I think that, my opinion is if she can fix this problem, there's value to it, and let's put the resources towards it to fix it. I would hope that once we fix it, it will save us money, and we won't need to spend those resources later.
I know there are concerns about this issue, and I think one thing that a lot of employees don't understand is when we downsized in the early 90s, we lost 1,500 positions in admin, but we didn't change the work. It's almost like, what do you expect?
Right.
And what we've got to do now is we've got to make some investments, some short-term investments for probably 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. And then, as Vincent said, we're already on the road to recovery. And we've got to take it serious. We've got to be very deliberate. We've got to have a good plan and move out.
Well, 2 years ago on the Mount Bakers-Laqualmy, we went through a workforce planning session, and we identified a large majority of the admin positions to be reduced. When we started getting into IBM implementation and into the FFIS pilot work, we backed off of that very quickly. And I'm glad we did, because you know, when you're going through a new system, you got a learning curve anyway. So there's some of that involved, and I think we got to be sensitive to that and realize that there's got to be an investment there, and you may need to reprioritize over the next few years to get it done.
You know, in thinking about this issue, we as an agency are getting a better sense of what adaptive resource management is. But adaptive business management is something altogether different, especially when you have systems that are the age that they are, and with technology changing as fast as it is, and the need for technology to change to keep up with the needs of our business, somehow, some way, we're going to have to be adaptive in those arenas too, and maybe look at new ways of acquiring information, compiling information, and responding to the needs department and others. We do, keep in mind, we do have probably one of the most diverse missions of any of the land management agencies, and so, and we do manage 191 million acres, and we do have many, many activities. It is going to be a considerable challenge to do that. But in Vincent's words, and I trust her, it's doable. Another thing I took away from her discussion was this is not an issue that's unique to the Forest Service in terms of being responsive to all the new statutes and other requirements in this regard in the financial arena. Other agencies are going through this as well, and so we're trying to be part of Team USDA and meet other interagency needs at the same time, as well as Congress. And speaking of which, it's very difficult to get important accomplishments out there on the table when all they want to talk about is your performance in this arena. So the sooner we can reduce the angst in terms of where we're going there, we can broaden our communications on the things that we really want to share with them.
The important thing to understand is that what the Chief Financial Officer Act of 1991 basically told us was that they expect government to use the same CPA certifiable accounting standards and principles that any stockholder would require of a privately owned company. It's fairly simple and straightforward. But the thing to keep in mind is we're a large organization. 75 million transactions a month, 800 data entry points. You know, and we got to get on with it.
I think it's a good segue into what was a significant part of our discussion during the conference, and that was on the recreation strategy. And there was a tremendous discussion, and by all account, it was excellent, and some good points were made. And I think we have a really good example, or several good examples of some of that discussion.
Generally, I'm very supportive with what you've presented, but one of the key things in the sustainable development context is the principle that place matters, and we're trying desperately in this agency to link sustainable natural resources and everything that encompasses with sustainable communities and everything that encompasses. And I have to say my general impression is that the listening orientation is a bit of a very surface treatment of what it means to really work with communities and understand how recreation fits within their vision of their future and what they want, and therefore would be supportive of what we want. And so I think part of what still needs to be worked into this process is how do we really get into a collaborative mode with the communities on this.
What Ruth said was I think one of the most important remarks made, particularly in regard to communities that could transcend any activity that we have responsibility for doing. That as we plan and strategize direction on our national forests, that there should be considerable respect given to the desires of the community as to, one, whether or not they want that activity to occur at all, and two, that they help frame what that activity is, does, looks like, and their role in it. This is a significant paradigm shift, in my opinion, of how we go about engaging local people in Forest Service decision making. And it's something that, even though we have made considerable progress in, that we keep in front of ourselves and we keep in front of our people. It's another one of those things that if you don't, you know, what are you doing to the progress of that action? And in terms of community stability, sustainable communities, those kinds of things, economic assistance, and how you can do activities in communities and make it lasting. Those kinds of things are increasingly important in an increasing number of communities, and to the extent that we can apply these considerations in everything we do involving communities, I think strengthens the outcome for the agency as well as the people we serve.
Well, what Janet was describing when Ruth got up and talked about that point, recreation is one of the 4 important parts of the agenda. And what was really impressive to me, and maybe the strength of the conference, was that even though everyone knew this is where we want to go, we all felt that, well, I think most of the speakers, there was this common thread that before we set out there, we have a learning point here that we learned with a lot of other areas in grazing and timber. We need to have our communities that are affected by these actions along with us. And I was really impressed that that 5 years ago, I don't know if that would have happened. And for one, people spoke up and said their piece, and the other part was that the piece was about communities, and I thought that was wonderful.
There's an important linkage here, and I was really impressed with Robert Schulman's presentation on marketing. And most of us, marketing is advertising to most of us, but the fact is the most important part of marketing is understanding what people's needs are, understanding what the need is, and then filling that need. And that's listening, and listening to the communities.
And another important part of that marketing is the goods and services side, as far as what kind of goods and services do we provide, what niche do we have in that market, and how that fits with matching up with the people's needs and desires too. And I think Schulman's moving in that direction from what I could tell.
I was impressed with Skip Coughlin's point about that, you know, what is it that we have, what is our market niche, is one of the questions that we talked about. And Skip, I think, said it best in that what our market niche is that we provide natural settings, open space, large unfragmented landscapes, and I think that in a sense says it all. The private sector doesn't have that.
Well, that's a good transition for another segment. We have an interesting comment from Jeanette Kaiser of the Manti-La National Forest, and you could roll that tape.
I think that we got to be real careful. I think there's a fundamental dialogue that has to take place here, because we're kind of moving along in the old trappings of very functional approach to things. And I think if we as an agency buy into the resource agenda, then it's not recreation's role to feed us recreation, but recreation becomes everyone's role. So state and private and wildlife and forest, health, and everyone, including research, needs to be a part of building what recreation is to us. And I think that's what you're hearing here, is people feel like they're being talked to a little bit, and it's not a criticism, because I think there's a lot of wonderful work, but I think that dialogue could help us move forward together instead of separate.
Great observation by Jeanette.
What Jeanette was referring to was responses to the recreation strategy that was presented, and it's in draft form, by the way. I think that there is a lot in there. I hope people will take it and read it and still give us some feedback. It was a perfect opportunity to to have the whole national leadership team plus the diagonal section of the Forest Service there to give us input and dialogue, and it was fantastic. What was really neat was to see the passion again and the real interest and everyone just fighting for the microphone to give their input. And I think it's going to be a real good starting point or jumping off point now to move the recreation strategy forward. The other thing I want to say is that integration, the strategy itself was built with the intent that it wouldn't be functional, that it is part of the whole four-point agenda. And if it's a big part, but it crosses over and into roads, into healthy ecosystems, and into restoration. So that was the intent of the package. If we're not there yet, which I heard we're close, but we had to do some more, I was really encouraged with that whole discussion and felt it was a great opportunity.
We talk about ecosystems being boundaryless, and I think Jana's point was that the fact that the organization needs to be boundaryless,
Yes. Right.
that we're too functional, and we've got to blur the boundaries between the National Forest System functions. We've got to blur the boundaries between state and private, between research, and really work together.
In fact, to me, state and private and research both are just critical to implementing any program, especially when we start talking communities and getting the right information out. And state and private has so many tools that I think a lot of folks in the field could be using and may not even know about them. And I think we heard a lot about that this week.
When Mike mentioned earlier the comments that Skip Coughlin made about the settings, you know, I think about forest health conditions in terms of Jeanette's remarks, and that, you know, if we have one of our most pristine areas that's most popular to the public, or that's by a very popular scenic byway, that's being ravaged by some moth that we can't seem to eradicate, that's a problem. That's a problem not only in terms of the health of that forest, that's a problem that has a ripple effect in terms of the use of those areas. And so, yes, it is a forest health issue in terms of the importance of recreation. Yes, if watchable wildlife is on the rise, and this is something that we all can contribute to and enhance, and I think that's what she was getting at, the value that we could add. And the grasslands, for instance, in terms of the increasing value that's having for our publics on a recreation basis. One of the things that we got into this week was the social research associated with recreation, and the number of activities, the different kinds of activities that the American public is asking of us. Even identified as what baby boomers want, and the pre-baby boomers want, and the 20 and under want, and it's a lot of stuff. And in order to be responsive to what the public demands and our niche in it, and we're going to have to take a look collectively at all of that to see how smart we need to be in providing that service to them. But yes, that was a real good comment, because I think what she was saying is we all can add value.
Janet's point about communities also cuts across a lot of lines. The private landowners and others. If you look at sustainable forest and rangeland ecosystem management, if you take a look at watersheds, this just doesn't apply to the National Forest System. It applies to all the forests of the United States.
For many people at the conference, the recreation strategy needs to better reflect the human connection to the land. This is described eloquently by Peter Asopoulos of the Southern Station.
And I'm not a recreation specialist, but I am an avid recreation person. And I want to make two comments, but I'll limit myself to one of them right now. I applaud the group's efforts to bring a sound business basis to the recreation strategy here. I think this will go down in history as the greatest contribution of this point in history with recreation management. And I've been a strong advocate for a long time for this. And Linda Donahue accuses me of using my left brain too much, and I'm going to have to confess to maybe some hypocrisy right now, because I'm going to let the right brain out a little bit. I am a little worried about maybe losing touch with the human dimension of this that goes beyond caring for the land. And let me illustrate that with a recent experience I had with my son in the Boundary Waters canoe area. He's 27 years old, and he invited me to come up to Minnesota, where he lives now, to show me the land up there. When I was a kid, I grew up in Minnesota too, and when I didn't have a hockey stick in my hand, it was a canoe paddle. Spent my summers in the Boundary Waters country and did about 10 years of research on the Superior, and he was showing me his land. When I told my dad about that on the phone out in California, he said, "Oh, you've been up in my country, huh?" Here's a piece of real estate, a Forest Service recreational site that ties 3 generations of my family together. It brings the 3 of us very, very close together. I expect that there are a whole number of families in this room and in the American population that have the same kind of an experience and tie to the land. I expect that there are a whole lot of other human values that are served by the kinds of opportunities that this organization can provide in the realm of recreation. And I hope that we won't lose touch with those things. Part of the purpose, part of the motivation for our business here is to elevate the human condition. And it's not just a business proposition, it's not just filling a market niche. There is a higher purpose to be served, and I hope that we can, through this program and many others that we do, improve life for Americans and improve the human condition through this.
Thank you.
What a great setup for as we start to wind down from this conference discussion. And Mike, I turn back to you on thoughts on Pete and what he laid out for us to think about.
Well, I always appreciate Pete because he has a way of saying things that really capture one's attention. It's about values. The values. What do people value forests for? Not only national forests, but all forests. You know, the water, the wildness, the naturalness, the open space. What we can do for future generations and how that cuts across generations. It's just a wonderful statement.
Pete said he apologized for going to his right brain, and I wish he would go to his right brain more often. It must be when that researcher goes to the right brain, you get these magical moments, and I love them and I appreciate them. Boy, how can you really add on that? But what that left me with, that was one of those just heartfelt portions of the last 2 days, and those are the kinds of things that I think about internally for our employees on why they love and they work what they do. There are some days where maybe IBM isn't working right, or you've got another appeal or litigation, and it just is just a rotten day. You can still go out, jump over the hill and walk down to a beautiful riparian area, or you can do what we did last evening and be sitting on a beautiful lake in the desert with these desert, stars coming through. It's just gorgeous. And so I just really appreciated his comments, and I'm going to remember them for a long time.
Yeah, I would like to echo that, and he also described a perfect outcome-based, goal-oriented strategy, whatever you want to call it. And if we can keep that in mind with all of our programs, focus on what's positive, what's good, what the good we're doing, rather than totally focusing on the rocks in the river, we'll get through anything. And that's a great philosophy, and applauding.
I'll echo those comments. Pete was absolutely right, and I would say that everybody around this table has done things, been places, seen parts of the landscape that were magical and downright spiritual. What comes to mind immediately is floating down the Snake River through Hell's Canyon a couple of years ago, which was a very, very special thing to me. One of the things that we did learn in terms of our social research statistics this week was that only 8% of the U.S. population enjoys what we have. And when we talk about those values and being able to affect the human condition. Something's going to have to be done differently, and I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but we need to broaden our efforts so that we can provide similar experiences to a broader segment of our public, and somehow, some way, more aggressively conduct outreach to some of our non-traditional publics.
Thank you, Janice. Undersecretary Jim Lyons participated with us for the entire 3 days of the conference. On the first day, he posed a question that gets to the essence of what our natural resource agenda is about.
The question is, what do you want your colleagues to know 5 years from now when you meet at another national leadership conference? I honestly doubt it's going to be how many times you met your targets or how you spent your budget, your inputs. That's probably not what's going to matter. More likely, it's going to be, as Mike and I have said many times, it's going to be for what you left behind, for the courageous decisions that you made, and for the conservation legacy that you leave.
Before you go to closing, any other thoughts or comments before I turn back to Mike?
Well, one thing that I'm still reflecting on is what Pete had said about following the line. And when Mike opened up the conference, he talked about a visit to the Deschutes National Forest and the publics out there, and they said, we don't, we want our forest not to look like clear cuts or catastrophic burn over areas. They want something that looks very natural. It's very complicated. When I think of what Pete said, I think about we do know how to follow the line. We have the heart and the people and the skills at a level to do that. And so I am really optimistic that we can do that. I'm very pleased to see the enthusiasm and the engagement of the folks this week, and for your sincerity, Mike, and laying out that agenda with us. Thank you.
We have a very complex mission to provide as far as goods and services, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be without controversy. But I really feel that the four-point agenda that we're following on, and somebody made the point, it's not the chief's four-point agenda, it's the Forest Service four-point agenda, will give us the focus to propel us into the 21st century in a very effective and positive way, I think.
For those people who say, I don't know how to go home and implement this, I say that for the funding proposals from the field to implement the Forest Service agenda, there were over 900, and we were only able to select 100. I think that tells us that there are a heck of a lot of people out there that know what this means. And that's a positive message. People who are doing it already on the ground. The other thing is that Michael Raines made a comment this morning, and he says, Mike, you're viewed as chief of the Forest Service, when in actuality, because the Forest Service is the preeminent world-class forestry agency, that you are the chief forester of the United States. And I think that if we look at what that means, cross-ownerships in terms of forestry in the future, we will look at it very, very differently. And the one thing that I would hope that as we move to corporately implement the Forest Service agenda, the one thing that we'll look back on is that we learned that we all have to hang together to do it.
Mike, let me step in as a panelist instead of a moderator. Do you see future conferences like this, expanded conferences with the cross-cutting of all agency employees, or do you see returning to the model of the senior leadership?
We've got to embrace all the ideas of the organization. In fact, the very purpose of this broadcast is I believe this is probably the first time ever that a cross-section of the organization has got together to talk to all the employees, that we're able to get in front of TV sets and listen, and we're going to have videos. And we need to gather all of that and listen very carefully as an organization. It's like Bob Joslin said. He said it best, we need to talk less and listen more.
What a great line. And unfortunately, we're almost out of time. And some final thoughts, Mike.
You know, on the eve of the 21st century, our challenge is to demonstrate that through our management actions, through our research, conservation leadership, and how society lives in productive harmony with the land, with the resources and values that sustain us. This is our land ethic. And you know, the Forest Service was where the land ethic started. The forests and the grasslands and the private forests and the urban forests are all important to the American public. And the forests and grasslands of the future that I see are models for ecological sustainability. We have the best talent in the world. The forests of the future that I see contain healthy watersheds that properly catch, store, and release water over time. The forests and grasslands of the future that I see provide for a wide array of cultural, educational, recreational, and economic opportunities for the American people. The forests and grasslands of the future that I see are an internationally known model for demonstrating how mankind can live in productive harmony with the land. Again, the land ethic. And the forests and grasslands of the future that I see are healthy and productive, diverse ecosystems. And the Forest Service of the future will be a place where employees of all races and all backgrounds are treated with decency and respect. And the Forest Service of the future will be a place where we are an innovative organization known for our research, for our creative thinking, and for our acceptance and leadership of new ideas. And the Forest Service of the future that I see is an agency widely known and respected for its conservation agenda. And the Forest Service of the future that I see is an agency that has earned the gratitude of future generations for helping to reestablish a land ethic that reconnects people with the land that sustains us all. I want to say that a touching thing happened to me yesterday around the campfire at Bartlett Lake, and I hope that you all felt the same way. I know many people that were at the meeting did. And that was the Native American ceremony that ended under the stars of the desert on Bartlett Lake, and that's that you're managing, I'm managing, we're all managing for 7 generations. We need your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks again to Liz, Janice, and Denny for being with us here in the studio this afternoon. On behalf of all of us, thanks for watching, and so long from Phoenix.
This broadcast has been a production of the BLM National Training Center.
Thank you for taking the time to be here today. What I'm saying to you is important for all Forest Service employees, not just firefighters. These messages, for those who continue to support fire and aviation programs, those who have not yet committed, and especially for those charged with the responsibility to manage public lands. Before I begin, I wish to commend you on your excellence in getting the wildland fire job done safely and effectively during 1996. Over 6 million acres were burned by wildland fire across the nation last year. Putting out the thousands of large and small wildland fires was no easy task. And those of you who participated performed very well indeed. I'd like to personally thank you on behalf of the public lands, private property you protected, and the lives that you saved. I can only hope the dedication and diligence that was applied last year to safely working efficiently, and caring for the land carries over this season. Today I'd like to discuss these things: safety, working efficiently and cost effectively, and collaborating with our partners to promote stewardship and healthy public lands. I believe we can usher in a new era of resource stewardship and a deeper commitment to conservation by dedicating ourselves to working cooperatively with all of our partners, including the states, the rural fire organizations, and our sister agencies. I also feel that to better serve the needs of people, we must collaborate on building stronger ties with those who use public lands so that we may have their commitment to support us as we secure the health of the land. I also want to reassure our firefighters that when wildfires occur, their preparedness is accounted for through our line officers' actions, through our administrative procedures, and through our training. As an agency, we must capitalize on opportunities to use wildland fire management techniques in a manner that will reduce catastrophic wildfires, reintroduce fire into fire-dependent ecosystems, and above all, to make firefighter safety the first priority on every fire, every time. I believe organizationally we have a special tool to do this. The tool is Fire 21. I am fully committed to its principles and its goals. I want to tell you that during my first month as chief, both myself and my staff fully committed to Fire 21. Simply put, Fire 21 is the safe and effective use of wildland fire today, tomorrow, and into the 21st century. Fire 21's goals are clear. Number one, Fire 21 puts firefighter and public safety as its highest goal. Fire 21 supports the role of fire in restoring and sustaining healthy ecosystems with a strong emphasis on using fire as a management tool. Fire 21 supports integration of fire and aviation into land management planning. Fire 21 strives to improve agency accountability at all levels within the Forest Service, especially with line officers, district rangers, and forest supervisors. Implementing Fire 21 into an integrated fire management program will help us to work safer and smarter, remain accountable, cost-efficient, and foster better stewardship. Fire 21 will move us forward into the 21st century as respected leaders in conservation. The key mission of our success will be the safe accomplishments of these goals. One of the hardest days of my life, both as the head of a large organization and as a father, was right after the South Canyon fire. The day that Jack Ward Thomas and I visited with some of the families of the 14 firefighters who perished on Storm King Mountain. It's a day I'll never forget. Since 1994, we have moved forward in firefighter safety programs, and we continue to make progress. Immediately after the South Canyon, all of the firefighting agencies looked carefully at their programs and made significant changes. The most critical change is the new federal wildland fire management policy, and you need to know and hear again that this policy, firefighter and public safety, are our highest priority. This symbol, the Fire 21 triangle, is the emblem of fire management in the 21st century. The modern-day fire triangle represents our agency's commitment to a total fire management program. At the peak of the Fire 21 triangle is safety. At its base are accountability and commitment. safety, accountability, and commitment are made possible through integrated resource planning, active dialogue, collaboration, preparedness, and organizational effectiveness. The Fire 21 triangle also represents our agency's commitment to planning, prevention, prescription, restoration, maintenance, and sustainability of all ecosystems. Fire 21 is our agency's action plan for implementing the federal wildland fire policy and doing so in the safest and most effective manner possible. On the fire line and in all wildland fire support positions, your safety continues to be our #1 priority. Let me reaffirm that wildland fire is one of our most effective tools that we can and will use to manage resources. And let me close by saying that we are all in this together, the Forest Service employees. We are the facilitators, the suppliers of knowledge, the suppliers of expertise, the professional resource managers, the educators, the communicators, who will help find the solutions for people now and in the future. Under the umbrella of Fire 21, I believe we have a tremendous opportunity to succeed. I support Fire 21, and I hope you will too. Please join in the effort to the best of your ability.
Water, the source of all life. Water, our most important natural resource. The coming century will see crucial battles over water that will affect the lives of people everywhere.
Water is one of our most abundant resources. 70% of the earth is water. But of that 70%, only 3% is fresh water. And of that 3%, only 8/10,000ths is renewable, available fresh water for human use. And when we take a look at our forested landscapes in the United States, 1/3 of the United States is forested, but 2/3 of the runoff comes off of the forested landscapes. In fact, the cleanest water in the United States flows off of our forested lands and our national forests. Now, I'm one that grew up in northern Wisconsin's beautiful lake country, the Chequamegon National Forest, and never ever did I think I'd see a time where water, or better yet, a shortage of water would be a problem. But if we take a look at not only the desert Southwest, but in many parts of the country, we see water shortages, water problems, runoff problems, and it's really all linked to the way we manage the land.
We have destroyed just about all of the natural habitat here in the Los Angeles area in our effort to get rid of water, to get rid of stormwater. Over the years, we have paved over the landscape. As much as 80% of the land is now covered with buildings, roofs, roads, streets, parking lots. And as a result, the natural hydrology of the landscape has been changed dramatically. There's no room for the water to soak into the ground naturally. And this is what we're trying now to figure out ways to restore all over the watershed.
Because these watersheds have been so fundamentally altered, Los Angeles is not able to retain its seasonal rainfall and is forced to import water from hundreds of miles away. The Angeles National Forest was specifically created to control flooding and provide a stable water supply for Southern California. 30 to 40% of the drinking water for the Los Angeles Basin now comes from the Angeles National Forest. By managing the urban watershed as a whole, we can increase that percentage and reduce the dependence on imported water.
The Los Angeles River, which was really the life source for the development in Southern California today, is a concrete lined ditch. The vision is to bring that river system back, to bring riparian species back, to widen the river, so we have a natural floodplain and we have native species, and that we bring back a river system, a real river system, instead of the concrete line channel that we have today. Well, the Forest Service is involved in the community of Los Angeles, creating pocket parks, riparian corridors. We're funding grants for different community groups to do these plantings. When we bring back medians, when we plant more trees, the whole system connects to itself. We're creating more jobs, we're creating livable communities, and we're maintaining our water supply.
The good news is the Forest Service has the science, it has the systems, it has the ecosystem management perspective. It has developed a unique ability amongst agencies to bring communities together and manage stakeholder input and stakeholder process. That's critical, and it's the only agency I know that has actually made that part of the culture.
It makes more sense to utilize what we have here more efficiently. And this is what we need to be doing in Southern California. And if we can do it here in Southern California, you can do it any place.
I often refer to the national forests as the headwaters of the nation. 80% of the rivers and streams in the United States start on national forest lands. And if you think about the terrain, it's really easy to understand. Much of the bottomlands was developed initially, became ranches, became farms, or agricultural crops. Today are urban developments. But if we take a look at our mountain ranges, we really see the arterial system of the United States.
The high country became the public lands under the stewardship of the Forest Service. The Northern Rockies provide a great illustration of how much of our water flows from our national forest lands.
This is Lemhi Pass. It's located on the Continental Divide on the border between the states of Idaho and Montana. Water which falls in this area has the potential to go either east and flow into the Missouri and Mississippi River systems and ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean, or west into the Salmon River and into the Columbia system and ultimately into the Pacific Ocean. The combined area of these two watersheds is better than 3/4 of the United States. So water that originates in this area and flows through these two huge river systems will commingle with water from over 3/4 of the country. It's the largest watershed area for any two systems just about anywhere.
If we take a look at what forests do for us with relation to water, it's just phenomenal. Because the function of watersheds and the function of forests is really to catch, store, and release water over time.
The Forest Service objective of restoring and maintaining ecosystem health has a crucial impact on the function of watersheds.
Watershed management has been part of the Forest Service mission from the beginning. At the time the West was developing, there were needs for all kinds of resources that the National Forest System could provide. There was a great deal of need for lumber and wood fiber. There was a need for grazing cattle on rangeland. There was a need to develop the mineral resources that are in the national forests. All of those things were ongoing at the same time and in an emphasis of a developing country.
We've learned over the years that the quality of water is determined by all that goes on within the watershed. Agriculture, industry, and urban development each have their impacts. To see their effects over time, we'll look eastward to the Chesapeake Bay. This is an area with a long history of development and use. The national forests in the east are a patchwork of lands that had been heavily abused. By the late 1800s, less than 30% of this watershed remained in forested lands. Much of it had been cut over and burned for fuel, for industry, and for agriculture. Watersheds were devastated, and the rivers changed forever. In the late 20th century, industrial growth was a big part of the Bay watershed. Factories, along with intensive farming and urban development, changed the landscape dramatically.
The work going on here in the Chesapeake Bay now is just phenomenal as people are coming together in an unprecedented way to really focus on water quality, the productivity of the largest estuary in the United States.
The Chesapeake Bay watershed is vast, 64,000 square miles. It stretches from New York to Virginia, West Virginia to Delaware, and is home to more than 14 million people. By the 1970s, really, citizens and scientists agreed that the bay was in trouble. Excessive pollutants, mainly nutrients and sediment, but some toxic pollutants as well from industry, were harming the bay in a variety of ways. What we try to do is bring people together to find the right players that can address a certain problem, and then try to apply some solutions on a watershed scale.
The challenge is to make all this real for people because it seems big, it seems distant, and I think one of the things we've really succeeded in doing here in the Chesapeake Bay is bringing the issue close to home so that people feel a sense of involvement, they feel that what they do can make a difference. We're trying to organize people in their own communities around their own small watersheds. One of the things I think we've learned here in the Bay region is that the Bay is the sum of its parts. There's a lot of small watersheds, all of which affect and ultimately determine the fate of the Chesapeake Bay.
One of the efforts the Forest Service has been involved in is a major initiative watershed-wide to try and restore forests along our streams, rivers, and shorelines. These riparian forests are incredibly important in terms of the health of our streams and aquatic habitats, but also can serve a valuable role in improving water quality by buffering pollutants that may come from our adjacent land uses like agriculture or urban areas.
This is Yellow Branch. It's a tributary to the Little Gunpowder Falls, and what we've done here is put up fencing to keep the livestock from entering into the stream, and we planted about 450 trees per acre and put tree shelters on them to create a forest buffer.
The scope of this project is enormous. Throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed, the partner agencies and organizations will plant 2,010 miles of riparian forest buffers by the year 2010. It will take hard work and cooperation to see this project through to completion. But we are seeing that we can make a difference.
Water is probably the most important substance we have. In fact, if we don't touch water every day, or almost every day, we've got big problems. We depend upon it. It's important for drinking, transportation, all the things that water has done for us as a human society. And then when you connect water and forests, it begins to paint a wonderful picture of why natural resources and forest management is important.
It all comes back to watershed management. Keeping more water in the Los Angeles Basin, protecting the high country and headwaters of our nation, and working across boundaries to restore our great waterways. Water is such a valuable commodity, and the Forest Service plays a vital role in protecting this national resource.